In a fast-paced tech environment, the potential attack surface increases with each release and new app created. Detectify automates cutting-edge knowledge from trusted ethical hackers into the development pipeline for reliable application security. Go beyond the OWASP Top 10. Check your web apps for over 2,000 known vulnerabilities actively exploited in the wild, monitor subdomains for potential takeovers, and remediate security issues in staging and production. Learn more with a free trial at securityweekly.com/Detectify. Go hack yourself. Security teams need visibility into Linux systems to detect and investigate incidents and protect against unwanted activity. Operations teams are not down with downtime, and with revenue tied to uptime, ops priorities are enterprise priorities. Which is a higher priority? Why not both? Capsulate provides flexible, production-ready infrastructure protection for Linux systems, all without a kernel module. With ops-friendly production security, Capsulate delivers monitoring, detection, and response without adding operational risk or cost. Visit securityweekly.com/Capsulate today to request a demo.
And that was What Are Words For When No One Listens Anymore, and from our last segment by Missing Persons, as well as Cynthia Burke. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. I'm your host, Mike Shima, joined by John Kinsella. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by completing the form at securityweekly.com/guests. We review suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. Our next live webcast will be March 18th at 11 a.m. Eastern, where you will learn how to prepare Linux hosts for unexpected threats. Check out our chat with Brandon in episode 140 to get a sneak peek at the topic. Also visit securityweekly.com/webcasts to register. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they're available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. And that brings us into the news, John, and I did not want to forget how to continue a new wave post-punk from last episode. And I also thought that shifting security right was a great way to have a callback to that episode, because this was an article that I think hit everybody's radar, and I was going to throw it onto the list, but you beat me to it. So let me throw it over to you to introduce this article.
Well, thank you. Yeah, when I was thinking about this earlier, I'm trying to get some sort of a tie-in between you turn me right around and turning left, or shifting left. I'm not quite there yet, so we'll have to work on that a little more. This is an interesting one from the guys over at segment.com. It's sort of the idea is, okay, well, security, we talk here for literally years about shifting left, right? And I don't think they really have the title quite right when they talk about shifting right. But the idea what they're trying to get is you don't just want to shift your scripts and your DevOps tools and your scanners and all these Band-Aids, as I refer to them, even as a purveyor of fine Band-Aids, they're Band-Aids. We don't just want to shift those things to the left, right? The guy with the security knowledge, if he doesn't, you've heard us talk about communication, stuff like that, but if he hasn't spent time in the trenches, if he doesn't know how to code, if he doesn't know how to, what goes on the other side of the wall, or the other side of the cube, if he doesn't have either doesn't have experience doing it or doesn't have, some sort of understanding, then you're going to have a pretty serious disconnect between those two halves. And that's sort of boiling this article down from my point of view into 30 seconds. But I think it's worth, probably honestly rereading every few months just to keep on our mind.
Yeah, I think so. And the way I also express it is that it resonates for me in the sense that we often hear about security champions, but we rarely hear the converse of that, of developer champions, as in, why don't we go drop a security person into development so that they can learn, that security person can learn how development works, building products. And I think that's really what resonated and stood out to me from this article, saying it, very eloquently, very well. And, it talks about just becoming a better developer in general. And the other thing that really stood out to me too is, there was, to quote, building customer-facing security features in partnership with dev teams help you better serve your customers. And that's another sentence that really I was inexpertly trying to get out of the, I think the McKinsey article from last week, where I was trying to talk about where's your product management or where's your product research from your security team in terms of what are they providing to their customers? Are they just saying, here's a bunch of vulns, go fix them. Here's a bunch of requirements. Now here's a bunch of privacy requirements, go implement them. Or are you, as a security person, taking on the responsibility of doing some of that work? Because one of those themes of DevOps is, as we've talked about, I think quite a bit, is the sense of taking on the responsibility of security. So why don't we also just say, hey, security, you should also be taking on some responsibility for actually building things. And again,
I really like the idea they had in here of actually embedding, right? I mean, you have to have both the management structure and the maturity in your org, but pick up someone and have them go work over on that side of things for a week or a month, and just if they're fixing the low-hanging fruit, right? The really simple bugs or the typos or things like that, get them into the process and get them a sense of what's going on over there, and realize that like when you're on that side, you've got 10 million things going on, plus bugs, plus customers, plus everything else. Oh, and you want me to fix something you think is a vulnerability that none of our customers have ever touched. So I think that's really valuable if people can do that.
I think so. And it's a great, the article sneaks in just that threat modeling emerges from exactly what you were saying. Just go fix a couple bugs, because it's asking some questions. Okay, you found some bugs to fix. Now spend some time on them. Where is the component used? How well tested is it? Do you understand what this part of the app is doing and why? Those are essentially threat modeling questions. And they come from doing the work and understanding the code. So just can't extol the virtues of this enough, in the sense of, I agree, not necessarily calling the shifting right, perhaps, as much as just go write some code as a security person to understand what devs are doing, or just to build that partnership with developers. Mm-hmm. So I think there's another couple of articles here, shifting gears a bit now, on supply chain. This is it's going to be the theme of the year, possibly because of SolarWinds is on everybody's mind. That was pretty cool. Things like typo squatting have been around forever, but we have new languages. We have new package ecosystems. One of them, in fact, is in Go. And here's another article that was highlighted for you, John. What stood out to you on this one?
Yeah, sorry, I have to close all my NIST tabs after talking to Cynthia. I think it is funny, right? In transparency, I was sort of quiet and not really putting in articles for a few weeks here, maybe over a month, because stuff wasn't just catching my eye, and I don't know if that was beginning of the year or what, and things seem like they're sort of, becoming more interesting again. And maybe that's me, or maybe it's the industry. I'm not sure which, and everyone can go in armchair quarterback psychology, that one. But yeah, so article about Go. And the concept of finding evil packages. So this guy went and did something interesting, in that instead of just looking and thinking and having a thought piece, he did put together sort of a fuzzer, I mean, to use that phrase, which would go through. He was looking for a list of top packages, didn't find that, but then just came up with a list himself, and started put together how do you actually, what would you look for? So the thing about Go, for folks who don't know, whereas in, say, Node world, where you specify, hey, I want this package name, in Go, when you include a package in your source, you include the domain in there as well. So github.com/stretcher/testify is on my screen right now. One of his examples. So he started with the idea of like, okay, what happens if we either, start making small changes in either the name, the package name, or the publisher of it. And he went through and he found one or two examples in here. One was pretty just a mistake. The other one looked like it had a little more interest in it. But still, it's harder. I think the takeaway is it's harder to do in Go, the typo squatting, than it is in some other languages, but still something we need to keep in mind. And as usual, sort of catches my interest. Just the thought of how would you look for this in your code? I'm not aware of any open source tools which would go through, and I mean, how do you actually specify that I want to use this one version of a package versus another? One of my thoughts, there's something else out there I've been looking at over the last week or so, or 3 or 4. There's a package that the original author hasn't, he won't archive it on GitHub. So while there's a newer package which someone else is maintaining that's more up to date and has stuff going on, there's still confusion between, okay, which one of these two should I use? So, but how do you do that in your application if you're a Go person like me or Node or any of these things? How do you make sure the list you're using is the list, so to speak?
The list, absolutely. And I think it's good that we're starting to find some things that stand out and meet the Kinsella criteria. The other aspect too is it's cool to see this as how is Go reasoning through this. And I think a lesson I take from here is not so much Go versus npm, but what is Go doing that makes it more resistant, perhaps, to the dependency confusion, but just equally vulnerable to typo squatting, just because people type things in and make mistakes? And are those properties desirable? And would we want to then apply those properties if we were to take them over to npm, or just name another package manager, PyPI, for example, and so on? So that's how I also try to look at this, is just what can we learn from what people are doing well, and let's imitate that and try to construct something more robust over time, rather than just repeating yet another vuln, which in the case of JSON, we talked last week about repeating yet another vuln in the sense of parsers having problems. This was a article from someone who had read about that original dependency confusion, about JSON interoperability. I'm getting myself article confusion going, and said, and basically a nice write-up that approached, I'm a developer with security in mind. How would I try and avoid this problem? So it's a little bit of what you were mentioning there, John, about how would I perhaps avoid this problem of packages in Go. In this case, they were looking through mitigating mitigating JSON parsing using a framework or a library called Marshmallow. And again, this was a bit JSON Python specific, but I think some of the thinking behind this that came out in the article was pretty interesting, in the sense of having schema validation, having a comprehensive test suite, and understanding what are the security properties of the tools you're using, and are they in a better default secure state, and they're going to stop mistakes or ambiguity of data types or character encodings trickle through, or are they just going to bail out early and complain about them? So that's my long-winded way of saying, follow-up article, go check it out.
Yeah, there might be a little bit of a article squatting going on here, possibly. This was interesting. Back to sort of the conversation last week, I think a good portion of it, I remember saying, if you're working in a bunch of these different languages and you have to track all that type of stuff, that's God help you, man, and also that's a bit of a sign. As you're talking there, Mike, it reminds me sort of what a common, almost code smell you'll get from a new young developer, where they're super interested, and they want to try all these cool different things. And the next thing you know, you've got 4 or 5 different languages in your project, and this is one of those examples of why you don't, you want that enthusiasm, but still you need to sort of shift it and focus it. But yeah, I like that they did the 1-2 punch of first sort of, these are all these problems, and this is how this is one way of thinking about them, with some decent code samples in there, which we always appreciate. So yeah, it's once last week scared you, this week will sort of give you a little bit of blue sky to think about and how you're going to handle this.
Exactly. Blue sky and Soylent Green for all of your code. There's the other, in the spirit also of, I was trying to look for articles that aren't just talking about here's yet another vuln, here's yet another vuln. I was also trying to gather some tools or some good defensive thinking. Another one I came across off of the Daily Swig from Port Swigger, the creators of Burp Proxy. They were linking to or talking about a .NET deserialization bugs. And again, this hopefully can still be relevant for those of you out there who aren't writing in .NET. One, just to read about what are what do deserialization attacks look like? Because they exist quite a bit in Java, as well as they can crop up in JSON as well, JavaScript. And what was neat about this was there was a tool associated with it and a paper by some researchers that was basically saying, here's how we essentially fuzzed or created a way to automatically look for this type of problem. And hopefully this is the type of thing that can then be generalized into other languages perhaps, or at least be something that's a part of your tool chest if you are on .NET, and at least have some idea or want to be able to think about how do we find these types of deserialization problems, what are the patterns, and build from there.
So it was fun, and I'm still thinking about my comment on the previous article. There was a few things from Portswigger popped on my radar this week. There are a bunch of good stuff going on over there as usual. But now, after sort of thinking about this, I'm sort of wondering, was it my lack of interest in AppSec, InfoSec, or was it things not coming out, or maybe is it potentially my sources filtering out some of these articles? Not purposeful, but just I start my days with Google News, so I'm sort of wondering if maybe I wasn't seeing some of this stuff. Interesting to think about. Just leave that there by itself. But yeah, this. So I was going to make a .NET joke and tune out, but I think there's value about this. I'll sort of double down on what you were just saying, and it doesn't matter. I think pretty much any modern language right now has the ability to serialize, unserialize, marshal, unmarshal. And we were talking about this last week when we talked about the other article. As developers, it's very easy for us to say, oh, we've got this big JSON blob coming in, YAML, XML, pick your whatever. We're just going to run it through the built-in library and take the little few pieces out that we need and keep on going. And it's, at least in my neck of the woods, you don't see too many people creating API calls which return just the data you want, right? Usually you're getting a hell of a lot more, unless you're doing GraphQL or something like that. But usually you're getting a lot of junk and you only want like 2 or 3 fields. So the chances of having some sort of a marshalling issue going on in there, or memory leaks, or overflows, or all these different types of things, right? You might not have, talk again about Go, you might not have buffer overflows in Go, but there's still a lot of other sort of nasties in there which can grab you. So I think this general topic should probably be a lot more on people's minds. Probably it's not going to be, because we're all going to be thinking about SolarWinds for the next 6 months. But yeah, it's don't forget about this stuff either.
Yeah, we'll work on a good branding name so we can draw more attention to this topic. We'll get back to you in next episode. Yeah, there is also now, speaking of like vulnerability classes, in the news, Exchange was getting popped by the scary 0-day attacks. Cue the dun 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 that we used in the last segment. And in this case, I didn't want to focus so much on like Exchange, but to bring two aspects of a conversation here. One is, this is fundamentally the initial entry point is SSRF, which is a big deal, obviously in this case, and big deal for cloud-based apps, because SSRF is basically when localhost is no longer local anymore, and it becomes accessible from anywhere. And bad things happen in capital letters. What was really neat is that Microsoft released a Nmap scripting engine script, just a easy way to run Nmap to confirm if you're vulnerable or not to this. And you can see in that script, I should have linked to in the show notes, how trivial it is to exercise this SSRF, in this case in some cookie values. So SSRF pretty easy to understand, pretty straightforward, and just as easy and elegant, I would say, to exploit. So I wanted to highlight the SSRF aspect of that, but then step back a second and say, let's say, imagine there's a big vuln for a mail server like this. There's, go out and patch. Microsoft also said, well, if you can't patch, here's some ways you might be able to mitigate But then the third unspoken aspect would be migrate. For example, why would you be running your own mail server at all? And one of those questions, isn't this a quote unquote solved problem that probably should just go to the cloud? And there I'm kind of, I think, trying to build a parallel to other thinking of what does it mean to have a move into cloud and run anything from a managed provider. I'm trying to be vendor and language agnostic, so to speak, here, for containers, or using Kubernetes, or even just saying serverless. The idea that I want to abstract as much of the problems of fundamental patching and quote unquote solved problems as I can, and just worry about the code that I'm writing. So I don't know if any of that triggers some thoughts on you, John, or if you would just go in a different direction and say, let's move on.
This week on Application Security Weekly, I'd like to introduce everybody to our new drinking game for Application Security Weekly, where you take a chug every time John says, why is this company that has a $2 billion budget on security once again got maybe not basic, but security issues. And I'll funny haha, but come on. And we've beaten that one to death, so I'll shut up. But several things here. I'll go in reverse order if I can keep track in my head. That means we're pulling off the top of this stack, right? They first, just around what you were saying. There's two things I never, ever, ever want to run again in my life, and I've run them both multiple times: mail servers, DNS servers. No, just no. I'm not going to do it better than a cloud provider. There is no reason to do it. If you're clutching your pearls and thinking about privacy and all that type of thing, dude, get over yourself. Worst case, go to one of the secure providers and hope that the feds don't get to them for another 6 or 10 months. It's just no, don't do it. No. So with that one out of the way, let's see who's next. Kubernetes, don't run that yourself unless you're developing for it. What I actually thought was interesting about this article came out before the article. I think it was a few days earlier last week, wasn't it, when Microsoft started pointing fingers at Hafnium in general. I think that was the first time they mentioned that particular actor. And I think their, I can't remember the name of the team, their threat team, threat response team, they seem like they're getting a little more vocal on I'll say attributing attacks to their originators. So that's sort of interesting to watch. They're opening their wings a little bit, and that's cool and interesting. We know these guys know a ton of stuff. So it's interesting to see them put a little more out there. The attack itself, or the vulns themselves, like you said, they're SSRF, deserialization. It's almost like we were just talking about that. Post-authentication, blah, blah, blah. By itself, it's a shrug. To me, there's a lot more interesting around the meta on this one.
Yeah, and I think we definitely won't spend too much time on this. I did link to Proxy Logon, which was the name given by one of the developer or the researchers who disclosed this to Microsoft. They haven't published technical details yet, but they promise that those details are forthcoming. The only other thing that kind of stood out to me is if you want to think about, what does a vulnerability from start to finish look like in a sense, the timeline that they posted was, October 1st, a dev core started reviewing the security on Microsoft Exchange server, and about 2 months later, on December 10th, 2020, they discovered this SSRF bug, disclosed it to Microsoft, and about 2 weeks after that, they were able to escalate that bug into basically admin privileges. So just kind of an informative anecdote data point of one. I will, make sure to caveat quite a bit, but just give a sense of what does it look like to be curious about an area of code, find an exploit, get a good working exploit of a bug. One of the things, perhaps, I'm trying to think of a good segue, but I'm failing at the moment, so that's why I'm just talking my way through it out loud, is observability. So this is one of the other articles that I pulled up, and I think it's in a way perhaps a good tie-in with the other one we were talking about, shifting security right, or in the sense of security working with developers. And this article it was a bit of a reminder about observability when we were talking with, speaking of Brandon, back on episode 140, I believe, and talking about targeting Linux, that maybe we shouldn't overspend our time and quote-unquote security budget on just hardening everything and shift to observability or just monitoring. And I will say, skip over the tired cliche of measuring and managing, quote. But I think there's some decent reminders in here, I'll say, about what does it mean to have metrics, and should they be, and how can they be informative for debugging your application, for being able to recreate an incident after the fact if you're working on that response side of things. So that's why I wanted to throw this out here as a developer practice that has some very, I think, direct security connotations to it.
Yeah, I'm going through some of my internal notes real quick for a name. We've been digging around on this stuff for weeks while we try to figure out what we're doing as part of sort of our architecture. How do we look at, metrics, visibility, all these type of things, and tracing, any type of modern microservices-based stack. I think you have to have some amount of this type of stuff, but there's so many things to choose from, right? So this is a CNCF post. They're looking at it from a CNCF point of view. I think most tools we're looking at I think they're sort of, there's probably some outside the space, but I think a lot of the more interesting ones are within the CNCF nowadays. But open tracing, and I just already lost a tab I was just talking about. There's another one out there as well, which was a merger of two, and that's what made it sort of interesting. They both sort of realized that things weren't going as well as they could. Man, I've got too many tabs. And they sort of brought it together. Here we go. Open telemetry. So there's a bunch in this space, and it's actually interesting to bring it back, as you were saying, to the shift left right right round blog post. Was I've seen internally as some of our guys brought Grafana up, they weren't really sure. This sort of just proof concept screwing around. What do we do with this thing? And they weren't sure themselves. But as they started getting data, you could see them start to, as you visualize some of these things for some of us, you start going, oh, what's that peak there? And they start digging in and going, okay, is that during a scan, or is that like, just like an hourly cron job? What's happening? You start, so it's, it can be a bit of a foxhole, but at the same time, it's, I think when you have that type of instant connection with any type of tool, but especially in this type of space, it shows that you're going in the right direction, and that your team's interested in it. There's a lot of value you can get out of this. So, as I say there in the opening paragraph or two, 102 projects in this category. It's a lot to read through. There's a lot of videos on it. There's a lot of stuff out there. This is a nice taste. It's something, one of my favorite conferences, which I haven't gone to, which I really want to go to, is it Monitorama? I think it is, in Portland. I think they might have finally moved it, but like every year they have all these really great talks. Like this has been going on for a while. And with my operational background, this stuff is always sort of near and dear to my heart. But yeah, it's anything you can do in this area. You're going to help yourself. You're going to help your ops teams. You're going to get that observability. So if you do need to do some amount of response, you won't be flying blind. So it's nothing but good stuff with it. The harder part, actually, just from a voice of experience, is not installing it, but keeping it going down the road. As you start getting more and more of this data, where do you put it? How do you make sure your monitoring systems don't slow down and that type of thing?
That's right. Yes, how to avoid having being overwhelmed or too much of a good thing. Absolutely. I think, speaking of conferences, the one last article I threw in here was just a shout out to B-Sides SF, which, like many conferences over the last year, have gone virtual. But in this case, they went virtual and a little bit retro, just pulling together a couple of past presentations that all free streaming. And they had some interactive live chat over the weekend, too, as they were doing it, that you could also just go read with some of the presenters on Reddit. And I just wanted to highlight, one was, of course, Clint Gibler. We talked with him almost exactly a year ago about his presentation on security, how to 10x your security is what he labeled it. But it was a lot of these things about how should you approach a security program? And it touched on how many of your security engineers should become developers or doing development. How much, where do you have observability, as well as getting into some tactical areas like vulnerability management, such things like that. So if you want to go back and listen to episode 100, go check that out, or check this presentation out if you're not familiar with it. And just as another one, there was as a tie into our previous segment, our chat with Cynthia on privacy, there was another B-Sides presentation on anti-privacy, anti-patterns from Sarah Harvey. And I think that was just another one that can stand out as a good on theme for today's show.
Yeah, and another one, like I said, there was a bunch of good stuff going on over Portswigger on their security blog. There was an article I didn't put in, we didn't cover. I don't know if you saw this, Mike, around a new form of side channel on the ring bus between CPU cores. So that's interesting for folks to go browse. But then the last one on here you just made me think of, they've got a list of 2021 cybersecurity conferences. So we'll see how many of those happen in real life. But if you're looking for a list of things to attend or submit papers from, there's a good one over there.
That's awesome. So we've finally found homework for our listeners is to go check out that list of conferences and put them on your calendar to follow, or check out the CFPs. And if you've got some interesting ideas, go ahead and submit them. And also just let us know if you have some blogs or some other write-ups or tools that you're working on your own. We'd love to highlight them here. So with that, I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank John, of course, for joining and talking through the news and talking through all things fun and complex in data privacy. Thank you all again for joining us. We'll see you next week on Application Security Weekly.